In this lesson, we'll take a look at the contour shader curvature node. So this particular contour shader is one that will allow us to change the thickness of the contour lines based on the angle of any particular edge. Right? So any edges that have a very high level of creasing or a very high angle from one edge to the next will receive much thicker lines. These areas that have very, very little variation from one edge to the next should have very, very thin lines. Now before we actually hook up this shader, there are a couple of things you need to make sure you have enabled. We need to make sure that we have the contour function levels and the store functions both plugged in to your custom contour shaders in the render settings. And then we'll also need to make sure that we have contour rendering enabled. So once we have that, then we can begin adding this particular shader. So let's start with the Lambert. This is what we're using as our main shader for this. So let's go over to the metal ray nodes, take a look inside the contour shader, and we're going to drop in contour shader curvature. Alright, so let's go to the shading group for this. Take a look inside the metal ray tab, scroll down, and plug this into the contour shader. Now you'll notice that there are actually very few attributes that control the look of this. So what we first need to do is come in and give this some kind of a nice bright line color that's easy to see. And now let's just go ahead and start with a quick render at what we have. So whenever we first render, you'll see that we actually get these contour lines that outline every polygon or every triangle of this object. So to eliminate that, let's take a look inside the Utilities tab. Let's go into our Contour Contrast shader and make sure that the difference index is disabled. Right, so that way we won't get any outlines around the individual polygons. And instead, we'll get this outline pretty much around just the outline or the silhouette of our object. So in order to start to get some of these lines begin to appear in some of these other areas, what we'll have to do is increase the sensitivity to the change in normal direction. Right now, this is only set to actually draw some kind of a contour line if the normal angle exceeds 90 degrees. So to increase that, let's go ahead and tell it to draw a contour line around any normal that exceeds more than 10 degrees difference. So here's what we had before. And now you can start to see that with that increased sensitivity, we now start to get a few more of these contour lines appear. So let's go ahead and drop this down maybe a little bit more. Let's try maybe a 1 degree normal difference. And there we go. Now anything that exceeds more than 1 degree difference from one normal to the next, we'll start to get these contour lines. So you'll notice that as these contour lines get thicker, you can really see that that corresponds to these areas that have a much greater change in their normal angle. So this can become a little bit more apparent if we go back to the actual attributes for this. You can see right now our maximum width, in other words the width at the absolute maximum or the thickest areas. You can see right in this area. So let's drop this down just a little bit, maybe to a width of 1. And then minimum, in other words the thinnest areas, are the areas that have the least amount of change. We'll drop this down a little bit more as well. And now that becomes even a little bit easier to see. So again, these areas that are very heavily facing away from the camera, get these really nice thick lines. And also some of these areas that are sort of facing away from each other as far as having a fairly significant change in their normal angle. You can see get these little bit thicker lines, and these areas right along here that have this very, very minimal change in their angle get these very, very thin lines. So that's a look at how we can utilize this contour shader based on curvature.